Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 16 Spanish musical masterpieces I couldn't live without. Oh, this is such a fun list. It really is. I enjoyed putting this together because, Spanish music has a bad rep. There's sort of this assumption that all the best Spanish music composers were not from Spain. They wrote music about Spain, like Rimsky-Korsakov and Debussy and Ravel. And, they did write fabulous music about Spain without ever going to Spain. Kind of amazing. Glinka, Russian people. Everyone does Spanish music because it's just so compelling. Harmonically, it offers so many wonderful opportunities for rich melody and all kinds of stuff. But the truth is, there actually were quite a few splendid Spanish composers who either were Spanish by birth or adoption, and here they are. Well, here are a bunch of them from the Renaissance all the way on. Really a splendid tradition, and some pieces you may not have heard of, and which you really ought to get to know. One of the things about Spanish composers is that most of them tend to write only like 3 pieces of music, then they drop dead. They live to be like 150, but they only write 3 pieces of music. They're very fastidious, which is kind of interesting. Some of them are. Obviously some of them aren't, but the most famous romantic ones tended to be. And so we that's one of the factors that leads to this myth that all the best Spanish composers aren't really Spanish. Anyway, let's just go through the list and we'll take them as they come, shall we? Morales. Oh, don't you love Morales? The Renaissance composer, fabulous Renaissance composer, Cristobal Morales, I think his name was Cristobal, I believe. Anyway, his Missa, Mille Regretz. I just love the title. I have to tell you, 1,000 Regrets. It's just fantastic. A beautiful, beautiful work. If you like Josquin and Lassus and all of those people, you're going to love Morales, and you really should get to hear him. There's a whole ton of Spanish Renaissance composers. They're not all that well known, but they wrote lots and lots and lots of music, and it's very, very beautiful. As, for example, Victoria, the Victoria Requiem, which is one of the great iconic pieces of a cappella choral music from the time of Palestrina, which is the very end of the Renaissance, the beginning of the Baroque period. Victoria was as highly regarded as any composer, and he spent most of his life outside of Spain. If I'm not mistaken, he was in Italy. He was doing things at the same time that Palestrina was doing them, and it's gorgeous stuff, absolutely gorgeous stuff. It has that same flowing sort of cool beauty, everywhere. And the Requiem is one of the earliest settings we have, along with, Ockeghem and some other people like that who did Requiem settings. It's extraordinarily, extraordinarily popular, actually, as far as that kind of music goes, and a magnificent, magnificent work. Then, by adoption, Scarlatti. We just had a little chat in the comments about Scarlatti. People said he was Italian. No, he wasn't Italian. He was Spanish. Because the sonatas, the Scarlatti sonatas, which are the pieces by which he's best known, would not have happened had he not been in Spain, had he not been exposed to Spanish music, had he not been best buds with the Infanta, whatever she was, her name was Maria Barbara Luisa Portuba, who knows, I don't know. She was Portuguese and Spanish and fat and ugly, and everyone loved her. And so did Scarlatti, supposedly. And she was married to was it Charles II or whatever, who never bathed and who was absolutely repulsive and gross. And it was really a very weird life. And into this bizarre life, Scarlatti wrote these unbelievably fabulous pieces that encompass, all of the wonders of the Iberian Peninsula. So he's Spanish, you people, come on. And it definitely Spanish is Soler, Padre Soler, whose sonatas, pick whatever ones you want. And of course the Fandango, which is like totally fabulous, which some people think isn't by Soler at all, but we don't care. It might as well be. Oh goodness, he wrote sonatas in the spirit of Scarlatti. Some of them are sort of pre-classical. They're multi-movement sonatas. They get a little bigger, but they are in the same style for the most part, and they're wonderful pieces. And there's a whole passel of them. quite a pile that you can indulge in if you look at Scarlatti and love Scarlatti and listen to Scarlatti and want to know what happened after Scarlatti. Go for Soler. And then Boccherini. Now, Boccherini was another Spaniard by adoption. He was, of course, Italian, and he spent a lot of his career in Vienna, then in Italy, and then he went to Spain, and that's where his output really blossomed while he was in Spain. And he's another composer who was Spanicized. His life in Spain was also quite difficult. He died in poverty. His particular noble person got like exiled or banished, or I don't know. He lived in a castle somewhere else, and he spent his career trying to make money publishing his works in Paris, and he was the court composer for a while to Frederick the Great in Germany. So nationalism wasn't quite as fixed a quantity back then as it was today, because it really went with your noble houses, with what aristocrat you were allied to. And the Spanish noble houses were Habsburgs, actually. So everybody was related to everybody else through birth in the nobility sort of thing. And the nationalist part was vastly less significant than it became in the 19th century during the great era of nation building. So you can't make yourself crazy over these things. And Boccherini's Spanish works are fabulous. And he did write the Fandango and the guitar quintet in D major, G448. It ends with that fabulous Fandango with castanets and all kinds of stuff, attached to it. It's wonderful. It's absolutely. There's also the quintet, night music in the streets of Madrid, which is fantastic as well. But there's that element of Spanish color and melody, and so much of what Boccherini did. And so you might as well consider him a Spanish composer. I think it works perfectly well. And not, by the way, as an expat or as a, not Spanish composer writing Spanish music like Debussy writing Iberia. That's not what Boccherini was. He was in Spain. He was attached to the Spanish court, and he wrote things based on his actual life experience in Spain. So he's Spanish. But that's the only mild controversy we're going to have in this list between Scarlatti and Boccherini. Everybody else was Spanish by birth. And I have to include three stunning zarzuelas, the Spanish version of the opera comique or the Singspiel or the musical, if you want to call it that. Gosh, they're wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Because, after the Baroque and classical periods, Spanish music became wholly indebted to the Italian operatic tradition, to bel canto. And much of the 19th century, there's very little orchestral or instrumental music of note. It's all stage music. And what stage music we got. We have Vives, Doña Francisquita. I love Doña Francisquita. And Bretón. Vives, by the way, also wrote Bohemios. La Bohème, same story. Get it? And that's been recorded quite a few times. That's quite popular. Thomas Bretón, La Verbena de la Poloma. Oh, gosh, another fantastic thing about a dove and a something, who cares? And Moreno Torroba, Luisa, Fernanda. That's a typical love triangle thing. And these are just sunny, brilliant, tuneful, incredibly ingratiating works full of wonderful little orchestral interludes that can capture the essence of Spanish popular stage music of the day. Just remarkable. It's a tradition that's really sort of died out in Spain, which is such a pity, as did, for example, the Gilbert and Sullivan tradition in the UK with D'Oyly Carte and those people. It was considered old-fashioned and passé, and particularly after the war, the avant-garde swooped in and mucked everything up, and it's such a shame, because they are fantastic works, incredibly beautiful works, and they gave us many Spanish singers and conductors who came out of that tradition. Plácido Domingo did, and whole bunches of people, and Victoria de Los Angeles, and they all worked in zarzuela when they were younger, when they were getting started, before they burst on the international scene. So great stuff, absolutely great stuff. Then we've got, let's see, Albéniz, Iberia, of course. I mean, I have to include Iberia. It's just the iconic piece of Spanish classical music for many people. It really is, and deservedly so. I mean, it's the Mavlost of Spain. It's the most beautiful, comprehensive series of tone poems for piano, later orchestrated by others, about Spain that anyone ever conceived, and it's extraordinary. Granados, the 12 Spanish dances. I love those pieces. I just adore them. They're so beautiful, especially the one that goes dum bum yum ya da 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 dum bum yum ya da 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 da. You know that one? Ya da 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 da. Incredible. And of course they've been arranged for guitar and accordion and nose flute and schlempola and every instrument in the world. They are glorious piano pieces that everybody should know. Ernesto Halffter, the Sinfonietta. Halffter was one of those composers who wrote, 1.5 pieces of music throughout his life. He spent most of his time trying to complete Manuel de Falla's Atlántida. God knows why. I mean, Atlantida is lovely, but Halffter was a very good composer. The Sinfonietta is a giant concerto grosso in 4 movements with all kinds of solo things and 2 dueling snare drums. And oh my goodness, it is one of the most joyous, life-affirming, glorious neoclassical pieces in existence. And it's just 1,000 pities he didn't write more music. There's only a few pieces by him that people know. There's the Rhapsodia Portuguesa, which is sort of like Ravel Goes to Spain, real Ravel actually, and a few other pieces. But the Sinfonietta is one of those works that you just got to have if you're a classical music collector, a serious person. It's Ernesto Halffter, by the way. There was a huge Halffter family, and the later ones were avant-gardists. Some of them very talented, but the music is not as immediately appealing, let's put it that way. But Ernesto Halffter's Sinfonietta is a screaming masterpiece that belongs in every collection of serious classical music from Spain. Mompou, he's another one of those guys who wrote 3 pieces of music. Well, he wrote more than that, but mostly tiny little piano pieces for the most part. And Musica, callada, music of silence. I mean, it's an oxymoron, of course, the title, and it's a deliciously haunting, Eric Satie-like, as in gymnopédie and those kinds of things. It's about stillness and concentration and quiet listening, and for meditation, you can't beat it. It really is. It's a glorious piece of music. So Musica callada is definitely one of those things that's got to be on my list. Turina is really underrated. Turina wrote a lot of orchestral music, first of all, which is nice. I mean, the Danzas Fantásticas and the Sinfonia Sevillana and, things like that. And then there are all these other piano suites. He wrote a zillion of those, and a lot of them he orchestrated. They're wonderful. They don't get played because they're not symphonies and concertos for the most part. They are what they are. They're suites and the smaller pieces, but they're beautiful. His music, like so much of Spanish music, has such a high gloss. It's very, very sophisticated and beautifully polished from a sonorous point of view, from a timbral point of view. And the Canto a Sevilla is his masterpiece. And it is totally unknown until a couple of years ago. I mean, the only recording of it for decades was Victoria de Los Angeles in mono. And, that was on a print. I mean, it was in mono, and it only showed up in Victoria de Los Angeles collections. No one paid any attention. Then we got a couple. There was one on Hensler and one on Arte Nova. They weren't great. Finally, a fabulous one came out on Chandos. Thank God. And it's the Das Lied von der Erde of Spain. It has 7 movements, 3 of them orchestral, 4 of them vocal. And the problem with Canto a Sevilla, as I talked about in my videos about it, is that they weren't published together. The whole work has never been published as a single entity. The orchestral ones were at one place, the vocal ones were in another place. So to actually do the thing, you had to hire 2 different scores and you had to reassemble it, which is just, it's bizarre. Absolutely bizarre, but it shows you, I mean, in many ways, Spanish music publishing never mind Spanish composition, was somewhat of a backwater compared to what was going on in most other countries. And I don't know, the music just wasn't treated very well sometimes. It's the same thing in Italy, where you had everything was done by, all these operatic scores were written by hand, and the idea of doing something like a critical edition, or the German concept of Werktreu, which is, being faithful to the composer's intentions in the work, was totally out there. And because the emphasis was always on the vocal stuff, the vocal bits got priority over the orchestral bits. It was crazy. But it is glorious. It's a big symphonic work for mezzo-soprano and orchestra. It lasts like 40 minutes. It should be all by itself on a program, half of a concert, and it should be played every 15 minutes. It's fantastic. Another work that we've talked about, actually, that I just think is fantastic is Montsalvatge's Concerto Breve, which is not terribly breve. It's not a particularly short work at all. It's a serious, full-size piano concerto, which Alicia de la Rocha recorded twice, at least, in her career, and it's wonderful. It's enormous fun. It's a late romantic, early modern Spanish thing, and again, there's no reason why it doesn't get programmed vastly more regularly than it does. It's a crowd pleaser, and it would bring the house down in concert. It really would. Rodrigo, we all love Rodrigo, don't we? Yes, I'm not doing the Concerto de Aranjuez. You can put that on your list if you want. I like his Concerto Serenata. That's his harp concerto, because I'm a sucker for harp concertos. He wrote a lot of concertos. There's like 7 of them. There's a whole slew of them, a bunch for guitar, but also there's flute, and there's piano, and there's violin. There's just cello, I think. There's really quite a lot. He also wrote very small amount of music. If he was blind, of course, it was more difficult for him. But the harp concerto is lovely. There's also a harp concerto arrangement of the Concerto de Aranjuez, which I love as well. I like it much better than the guitar original, heretical though that may be, because the balance problems are less serious than they are with the guitar. Anyway, the Concerto Serenata is absolutely lovely. Every single bar of it is fantastically beautiful. And, that's my pick. And last but not least, who have I left out? You all know. Falla. Yeah, I saved him for last. The Three-Cornered Hat. The great, fabulous ballet on the subject of Der Corregidor, which Hugo Wolf turned into a big, blowsy German opera. It works much better as a zippy Spanish ballet, trust me. It's about a horny mayor who's, out to get, the girl, and they cheat him out of his desire. It's a comic thing. Wow. What a masterpiece The Three-Cornered Hat is. People don't realize just how exquisitely judged Falla's sense of orchestral timbre was. Most of what he wrote was for small orchestra. El Amor Brujo, even Nights in the Gardens of Spain, and he's very, very careful. He's Brahmsian in the way he waits to use, heavy-duty instruments like trombones and things. And this is a case in point. The entire ballet, until you get to the very end, until that final Fandango, does not have trombones and tuba. It's just a couple of horns and then a trumpet and strings and woodwinds with percussion, of course, because it's 1920s. But then finally the full orchestra participates at the very end. And it's just you don't ever miss anything at all. It's all full and rich and gorgeous and beautiful, but it's unbelievably finely judged. And all of his music was like that, which is probably why he only wrote 10 pieces and lived to be 80-something and died. So, however much he lived. And so really, it's a great way to, I think, wrap up this particular list of 16 Spanish masterpieces. Oh my gosh, that I just can't live without. No way. I'm very interested to see your list as well. It doesn't have to be 16. You can repeat composers. You can do it any way you want, as long as it's wonderfully Spanish. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.